He walked through the tall glass doors every morning like a shadow, moving quietly and keeping to himself. No one really noticed him, and he had grown used to it over the years. The building was huge, full of polished floors, bright lights, and people in sharp suits who always seemed to be in a rush. He carried a small janitor's cart with cleaning supplies, mops and cloths, and he pushed it carefully along the long hallways. He knew the schedule by heart: when the lobby would be busy, when the elevators would flood with workers, when it would finally be quiet. Most of the employees hardly gave him a glance. Some barely even knew his name. He had been there for a long time, and yet he was almost invisible. Sometimes they called him the janitor with a hint of impatience, or looked at him like he was just part of the furniture. It could have been discouraging, but he had learned to carry on without expecting attention or praise. He had his own world, and that was enough. He liked the quiet hours best. Early in the morning or late at night, when most of the employees were gone, he could walk freely without worrying about people watching. During these times, he would pause by the piano tucked away in the corner of an empty conference hall. No one used it much anymore, and it was slightly out of tune, with a few keys sticking when pressed. He would run his fingers lightly over the keys and listen to the soft, imperfect notes. It felt like a secret world, a place where he could breathe. Many years ago, he had dreamed of becoming a musician. He had loved music since he was a child, learning to play by listening and copying songs on an old keyboard his parents had bought him. His fingers remembered every note, every melody, and yet life had pushed him in a different direction. Responsibilities, bills, and family needs had pulled him away from music. Becoming a janitor was not what he had imagined for himself, but it paid the bills, and he needed stability. Still, the music never left him. It lingered in his heart, waiting for the quiet moments when he could let it out. Some nights, he would hum softly while mopping the floors. The melodies were gentle, sometimes sad, sometimes joyful. Occasionally, the sound would drift into the offices, and he wondered if anyone ever noticed. Most of the time, no one did, but he didn't mind. He played for himself, for the feeling of the notes flowing through his fingers, and the small comfort it gave him. It reminded him that he was more than what people saw on the outside. He had learned to blend into the background. When employees rushed past him in the mornings, he would nod politely or smile faintly, but he rarely spoke. It was easier that way. People were busy, and they didn't have time for small talk. And he had long ago accepted that his life would not be in the spotlight. He had other things to focus on. Music was the most important of all. Every hallway had its routine, and he moved through them like clockwork. He knew which rooms needed the most attention, which carpets required extra care, and where dust liked to hide. He took pride in doing his work well, even if no one noticed. Clean floors, shiny windows, and neat desks were his small victories. And in the quiet hours, the piano was his reward. Sometimes when he played, he would imagine being somewhere else. He imagined concert halls filled with people, the lights shining on him as he played a melody that touched hearts. In those moments, he was not a janitor. He was a musician, free and alive. The contrast between his real life and his imagination was striking, but it kept him going. He knew he could never completely abandon one for the other. He held both worlds together in secret. His colleagues often underestimated him. Some saw him as slow or unimportant because he did not chase promotions or attend every meeting. But he had learned to read people carefully. He noticed small details others overlooked: the expressions on people's faces, the way their moods changed, the tiny gestures that revealed their true feelings. It made him quietly wise, though he kept his observations to himself. Occasionally, he overheard conversations where employees complained about work, money, or bosses. He listened politely, nodding as needed, but he rarely joined in. He had learned that words could carry weight and that silence sometimes spoke louder. In a strange way, he was part of their world and yet completely separate from it. He moved through life on the edges, observing, learning, protecting the small sanctuary that music provided him. Even the building itself seemed to understand him. The echo of his footsteps, the gentle hum of the air conditioning, and the soft creak of doors opening and closing became part of his rhythm. He had been there long enough to know the sounds, the smells, and the hidden corners where dust liked to settle. It was a world of order and structure, and within that world, he had carved out a private space for his soul. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a companion. On nights when the workday ended late, and he was tired from cleaning floors and emptying trash bins, he would sit at the piano and play without thinking. His fingers moved naturally, almost as if they had a life of their own. The music carried his emotions, his memories, and the dreams he had tucked away for so long. He never knew if anyone would ever hear it, and that didn't matter. The act itself was enough. One evening, he paused in front of a conference room where the door was slightly open. Inside, the lights were dim, and the room looked abandoned. He gently opened the door and approached the piano, brushing off a layer of dust from the keys. He closed his eyes and pressed the first note. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, but it grew stronger with every chord. The music filled the empty room, and for a moment, the world outside vanished. He remembered his first lessons, the long hours spent learning scales. The pride he felt when he finally played a song from start to finish. Those memories had faded over time, but the skills remained. He could still make the piano sing, even if only for himself. Each note was a reminder of who he was and what he had once dreamed of becoming. As the night went on, he lost track of time. He played slowly at first, then with more confidence, allowing the music to take him wherever it wanted. It was not about perfection. It was about expression. The highs and lows of the melody mirrored the ups and downs of his life. Sometimes the notes were joyful, sometimes sorrowful, but always honest. In those quiet hours, he felt alive in a way that his daytime job could never provide. Cleaning floors and emptying trash gave him a sense of purpose, but music gave him freedom. It reminded him that he was more than a label, more than a janitor. He was someone with dreams, feelings, and a story that had yet to be told. The world outside remained unaware of his hidden talent. People hurried past him, oblivious to the music that lived in his hands. They never paused to ask who he was or what he could do, but he did not need their recognition. He had learned to find value in small moments, in the quiet achievements no one else would see, and so he continued. Day after day, night after night, moving through life with a quiet dignity. He kept his music close, playing when no one was watching, pouring his heart into every note. The building held his secrets, the piano held his dreams, and in that small space between work and music, he found peace. He was invisible to most, yet in those private hours, he was fully alive. Carrying a story that only time would reveal, after long days of cleaning and moving quietly through the building, he would wait for the night to settle in completely. The moment the last elevator dinged and the office lights dimmed, he felt a shift in the world around him. The building, usually alive with noise and movement, became a quiet sanctuary. It was in these hours that he could finally let himself breathe, let his hands flow across the piano keys, and immerse himself in music that had lived inside him for decades. He remembered the first time he had truly played for himself. It had been years ago in a tiny, cramped room with peeling wallpaper and an old keyboard that barely worked. Even then, the music had filled him with a sense of freedom he had never known before. Since then, life had pulled him in different directions. He had worked odd jobs, struggled to make ends meet, and eventually taken the janitor position in this large corporate building. But that moment with the music stayed with him. It reminded him that he had talent, that he had a voice he could express, even if no one listened. Some nights, he would set down his mop and pause for a moment to listen to the echoes of the empty hallways. Each sound, from the faint hum of the lights to the soft creak of doors, became part of the rhythm of his world. Then he would walk slowly to the piano, brushing away a thin layer of dust, and let his fingers find the keys. The first note would always be soft, hesitant, almost testing the air to see if it was ready for him. But soon the music would flow, filling the empty rooms with emotion. He did not play fast or complicated songs at first. Instead, he played slowly, letting each note linger in the air. It was not about perfection. It was about expression. The music mirrored his life, the moments of joy, the deep sorrow, the quiet hope. He could tell stories with his hands that words could never capture. Every chord carried his feelings, every melody his memories. While cleaning during the day, he often imagined what it would be like if someone actually heard him play. Would they be shocked? Would they see the person he truly was behind the janitor's uniform? The thought both excited and frightened him. He had learned to hide, to blend into the background, and revealing his talent felt like stepping into an entirely different world. But still, the music demanded to be heard, even if only in secret. On some nights, the building seemed to come alive in response to his music. Shadows on the walls shifted as though they were listening, and the echo of his piano notes stretched down the empty hallways. He imagined the instruments speaking with him, the notes dancing in the air like invisible friends who had been waiting for him all his life. He never stopped to question why he had hidden this talent for so long. It simply was a part of who he was, and it needed a safe place. He remembered the people who had doubted him throughout his life. Those who told him he would never succeed, that his dreams were too big, or that he should focus on practical work. Their voices sometimes echoed in his mind, but in these quiet moments he could silence them with music. Each note was a statement. He was more than his circumstances, more than the label people placed on him. He could still create beauty, still move hearts, even if the world didn't know. Sometimes he played late into the night, losing all sense of time. The empty hallways became a stage, the shadows in the corners an audience. He imagined applause, not in reality but in his mind, a silent acknowledgement of the talent he had kept hidden. And even though he would never see their faces, the idea that someone might be moved by his music gave him energy and purpose. It reminded him that life was not only about work or survival, it was about expression, about leaving a trace of yourself in the world. However small, he had a few small routines before sitting at the piano. He would straighten the room, ensuring nothing was out of place. Then he would take a deep breath, close his eyes, and let his fingers wander over the keys. Each time he played, he discovered something new. Sometimes a melody would remind him of childhood moments, a park where he had first felt music in his soul. Sometimes a chord would carry the weight of past regrets or unspoken fears. And other times, the music would simply make him smile. A reminder that beauty could exist even in small, unexpected moments. He also thought about the people who worked in the building during the day. He had seen them laugh, argue, and struggle with their own problems. Some of them never noticed him at all. Some assumed he was simple or unremarkable because he was quiet and did not chase status. But he observed everything carefully. He knew the small details, the way a person's eyes lit up when they were happy, or the tension in someone's shoulders when they were stressed. He never used this knowledge to interfere in anyone's life, but it made him feel connected to the world in a quiet, meaningful way. One night as he played, he imagined what it would feel like if someone walked in and heard him for the first time. The thought sent a shiver through him, a mix of excitement and fear. Would they respect him? Would they laugh? Or would they simply walk away without noticing the depth of what he was sharing? It was a question he had asked himself countless times, yet he never sought an answer. The music itself was enough for him. But secretly, a small part of him hoped that one day, someone would hear. He played pieces he had learned years ago, songs that had shaped his understanding of music and life. Some were gentle and melancholic, evoking memories he had long kept hidden. Others were bright and energetic, reflecting the moments of hope he still carried. With each note, he poured himself into the piano, telling a story that was entirely his own. It was a story of resilience, of quiet determination, of a soul that refused to be forgotten, even though no one was watching. He felt a connection to the building and to the world outside. The music created a bridge between his private life and the life he led among people who never truly saw him. It was as if every note whispered a truth. He existed beyond the uniform he wore, beyond the janitor label, beyond the quiet corners where people only glanced and moved on. He was a musician, a dreamer, a human being with depth and complexity. Some nights, he would stop mid-song and just listen to the silence that followed. The empty room seemed to respond to him, the air thick with the remnants of his melodies. He realized that music was not just about sound. It was about presence, about leaving something behind, even if invisible. It reminded him that no matter how ordinary life might seem on the surface, extraordinary moments could exist quietly, unnoticed. Waiting to be discovered, he sometimes wondered if the piano itself remembered the hands that had touched it before. Perhaps the building had held similar secrets over the years, stories of hidden talents and untold dreams. That thought comforted him. He was part of a lineage of invisible artists, people who created beauty quietly, without expectation. And even though he felt small, compared to the bustling world around him, the piano allowed him to feel significant. He also reflected on the people who had influenced his life, teachers who had encouraged him, friends who had shared their own dreams, family members who had loved him despite his choices. Each memory shaped the way he played, infusing the music with emotion and experience. He realized that even a hidden life could be rich with meaning if one paid attention to the small, important moments. On rare occasions, he caught himself imagining a future where music was not hidden, where he could share his talent with others. But he quickly pushed the thought aside, knowing that practicality and survival came first. Still, the dreams lingered, like gentle whispers at the edge of his consciousness. They reminded him that life could hold surprises, and that sometimes the world might notice talent in the most unexpected places. He played on, night after night, never growing tired of the melodies that flowed from his hands. The piano became an extension of himself, a vessel through which he could express emotions too deep for words. The music was a private refuge, a space where he could be fully human, fully alive. Even if no one ever saw it, even if no one ever listened, it mattered. It was proof that beauty could exist quietly, patiently, waiting for its moment. And so, continued, moving through the night with gentle confidence, letting the music carry him. Each note was a story, each chord a confession, each melody a declaration that he was more than what the world perceived. He remained invisible during the day, but at night, he was a musician in every sense of the word, a keeper of secrets, and a creator of quiet wonders. He played for the joy of playing, for the solace of the music, and for the hope that someday, perhaps someone would hear. The janitor had grown used to his nights of solitude and music. Each evening, after the last elevator had stopped ringing and the building had settled into quiet, he would make his way to the piano, letting the familiar keys welcome his fingers. It was a ritual, a sacred time where the outside world did not matter, and he could be fully himself. But on this particular night, something felt different. He heard footsteps echoing softly in the hallway, slow and hesitant. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, a trick of the empty corridors. But the sound grew closer, and he realized someone was following him. He stopped and listened. The footsteps paused as well, and for a moment there was silence. Then, a small voice spoke from the shadows. "Is someone there?" it asked almost timidly. He froze, unsure if he should respond. In all his years, no one had ever stayed late enough to notice his music, let alone approach him. After a moment, he cleared his throat and said softly, "Yes, I'm here." A young employee stepped out from the hallway, blinking in the dim light. She had been finishing some reports late and had followed the sound of the piano. Her eyes widened as she saw him at the instrument. "You play?" she whispered, a mix of amazement and disbelief in her voice. He nodded slowly, uncertain of how much to reveal. The moment felt delicate, fragile, as if it could shatter with a single word. He resumed playing, letting the music speak for him. She watched quietly, her presence almost invisible, but he felt it nonetheless. The notes flowed effortlessly, carrying emotion, telling stories of years hidden behind the janitor's uniform. The melody was gentle at first, tentative, then grew bolder, more confident, as if his fingers knew they had an audience now. Even if it was just one person, she stood there, listening, completely captivated. Every chord seemed to carry a depth that surprised her. She had walked these hallways countless times, barely noticing him, assuming he was just another worker in the background. But now she realized she had been wrong. The janitor was not just a man cleaning floors and emptying trash. He was a musician, an artist, whose life had been unseen by those around him. He finished the piece and looked up at her. She clapped softly, careful not to startle him. "I've never heard anything like that," she said, her voice full of wonder. He smiled faintly, a little embarrassed but quietly proud. He had never sought recognition, but the acknowledgement, even from one person, felt meaningful. For a brief moment, the walls he had built around his talent seemed to soften. The young employee stayed a while longer, asking questions about the music and his experience. He answered cautiously, sharing just enough to hint at a past filled with practice, dreams, and sacrifices. She listened intently, clearly fascinated. It was the first time in a long while that he had spoken about music without fear of judgment. The connection was tentative, but real. A bridge between the hidden life he had led and the world that had overlooked him. Word spread slowly among a few employees, who were still in the building late. They began to hear the music themselves, drawn by curiosity or the sheer beauty of the sound. Some paused to listen outside the doors, whispers of disbelief and amusement following their steps. "Did you hear that?" one said. "It's just the janitor. He can't possibly be good," another laughed quietly. The janitor continued to play, aware of the attention, but choosing to ignore the murmurs. His music was not for judgment. It was for expression, for the release of years of hidden emotion. As the night went on, more people drifted into the hallway, drawn by the piano. Some stopped in their tracks, unsure whether to laugh, to watch, or to leave. The janitor's hands moved across the keys with a grace that silenced their doubts. Each note demanded attention. Each chord revealed the depth of skill that had been hidden for so long. The initial laughter and skepticism began to fade, replaced by awe and curiosity. People who had walked past him every day without a second thought now saw him in a completely different light. One by one, they began to whisper among themselves, questioning their assumptions. How had they overlooked this talent for so long? How could someone they barely noticed possess such skill? The janitor played on, oblivious to the exact words, but aware of the change in atmosphere. The energy in the hallway shifted. It was no longer a space of indifference or mockery, but of anticipation and quiet admiration. He allowed himself to take small risks in his playing, adding flourishes and subtle variations that he had never dared to show in public. The music became more expressive, richer, and full of emotion, as if he were sharing pieces of his soul with the listeners. The once empty hallways were now filled with the sound of a story being told without words, a story of perseverance, hidden talent, and the courage to keep pursuing passion despite the world's indifference. The people gathered began to see him differently. Their earlier laughter and judgment dissolved, replaced by a newfound respect. Some even felt a twinge of guilt for their previous assumptions. They realized they had underestimated the janitor, labeling him based on appearance and routine, without considering the person behind the uniform. The music was a revelation. Challenging the shallow ways in which they had measured worth and ability, he paused between pieces, taking a breath. The room was silent, except for the faint echoes of his last notes. He looked around at the faces, seeing surprise, admiration, and a hint of embarrassment in those who had doubted him. He smiled gently, understanding their reactions. It was not their fault. Assumptions were natural, but it felt good, unexpectedly good, to witness a shift in perception. To see people recognizing that there was more to him than the surface allowed. As the night deepened, the audience became more attentive. They leaned closer, curious about his techniques, fascinated by the effortless transitions between melodies and the depth of feeling conveyed in every note. Some whispered questions about his background, asking how he had learned to play so well, but he remained measured in his responses. He shared enough to reveal his dedication and love for music, but he kept the more personal aspects of his story private. This was his world, his sanctuary, and he wanted it to remain partly untouched by judgment. The initial shock and disbelief slowly transformed into admiration. The people who had once mocked him began to ask for specific songs, requesting pieces they had only heard in passing or dreamed of experiencing live. He smiled quietly, taking these requests in stride. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel a sense of pride in his talent. Not arrogance, but a deep, quiet satisfaction that years of practice, patience, and passion had culminated in this moment of recognition. Yet even in this growing attention, he remained humble. He did not perform for praise or applause. He performed because music was essential to him, a lifeline that had carried him through life's difficulties. Each note was a reflection of perseverance, a reminder that hidden potential existed everywhere. It's often unnoticed until someone paused long enough to see it. By the end of the night, the hallway had transformed. What had once been an ordinary corridor of a corporate building had become a small concert space, alive with curiosity, emotion, and awe. People who had hurried past him daily now lingered, quietly discussing his skill and reflecting on their own assumptions. The janitor's music had not only revealed his hidden talent, but had subtly shifted the way others perceived the world around them, highlighting the unseen depth in ordinary lives. As the last note echoed through the hallway, he paused and looked around. The small group of listeners, now silent and attentive, seemed to understand that they had witnessed something rare. Some nodded in quiet respect, others smiled softly, and a few simply stared, processing the revelation. The janitor returned to his cleaning tasks, moving with the same quiet confidence as before, but the air was different now. Something had changed. He had been seen, even if just for a moment, and the recognition, however subtle, was enough to light a small spark of hope. He left the piano and continued his rounds, the sounds of the hallway still buzzing in his mind. Even as he cleaned, he felt a quiet satisfaction that his music had reached others, that for once he was not invisible. The experience reminded him that talent and passion could not be contained indefinitely. Sooner or later, they found a way to surface, demanding acknowledgement and leaving a lasting impression on those who were willing to listen. That night had started like any other, with the janitor quietly making his rounds, waiting for the building to empty so he could play the piano. But tonight, there was a presence he did not expect. Unbeknownst to him, the CEO of the company had decided to stay late, reviewing some important reports in a corner office. The executive had no idea that something remarkable was about to unfold in the quiet hallways of the building. The CEO had been feeling exhausted, weighed down by endless decisions, meetings, and responsibilities. The silence of the building was a rare comfort. He sat at his desk, reviewing documents, when faint notes drifted through the air. At first he thought it was a radio or some background noise, but the sound was too deliberate, too emotive. It carried a presence that made him pause, setting aside the papers to listen more carefully. The music had a quality that made him stop in his tracks, richness and depth that immediately caught his attention. He walked slowly toward the source of the sound, following the melody down the long corridors. Each note seemed to resonate in the air, wrapping around him in an unexpected way. He found himself drawn to the sound, curiosity growing with every step. The closer he got, the more the music seemed to reflect a story, one full of emotion and experience, a tale of resilience, hardship, and hidden joy. When he reached the hallway where the piano sat, he saw a small crowd of employees quietly watching someone play. The janitor's fingers moved across the keys with precision and grace, producing a sound that was more beautiful than the CEO had expected from anyone in the building. The sight was unassuming. A man in a janitor uniform, slightly bent over the keys, focused entirely on the music. But the sound was extraordinary. It was impossible to ignore. The CEO stood silently, listening, feeling a strange mix of surprise, admiration, and curiosity. He could see the small group of employees trying to contain their astonishment, some whispering to each other, others frozen in quiet awe. The music did not demand applause. It demanded attention. Each note, each chord, seemed to carry a story that words could not express. The janitor was not performing for them. He was expressing something far deeper, a lifetime of experience distilled into melody. As the music continued, the CEO's thoughts drifted to his own life. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, focusing on strategy, numbers, and results. Success had come with prestige and recognition, but it had also left him feeling distant from the simple joys that made life meaningful. Listening to the janitor's playing, he felt a stirring in his chest, a reminder that there was more to life than status and power. The music awakened something dormant, a feeling he hadn't realized he was missing. The janitor was unaware of the CEO's presence, lost entirely in his performance. His eyes were closed and his body swayed slightly with the music, as if each note carried him somewhere far away from the empty hallways. The audience, including the CEO, remained silent, caught in the spell of the melody. The contrast between the man's humble appearance and the extraordinary sound coming from the piano made the moment even more powerful. It was a revelation that beauty and talent could exist in places no one expected. When the piece ended, the janitor slowly lifted his hands from the keys, unaware of the profound impact he had made. The hallway was quiet for a moment, the sound lingering in the air. Then the CEO spoke, his voice calm but carrying authority. That was remarkable. The janitor looked up, startled. He had never imagined the CEO of the company standing there, listening to him play. The presence of someone with such power and influence could have been intimidating. But the CEO's tone was not one of judgment. It was appreciation, genuine and unassuming. "Thank you," the janitor replied softly, unsure of how to react. He had spent years hiding his talent, and suddenly it was being recognized by someone he had never expected. The moment felt surreal, almost like stepping into a dream. The CEO stepped closer, observing the man with genuine curiosity. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. The janitor hesitated. He did not usually speak about music in this way, but something about the CEO's presence made him want to share. "Since I was a child," he said quietly. "It's always been a part of my life, even when I couldn't pursue it fully." The CEO nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the answer. "I've heard a lot in my time," he said. "But what you just played, it's extraordinary. You have a gift, and it deserves to be seen." The janitor felt a mix of pride and humility. Recognition from a stranger had often felt distant or meaningless. But recognition from someone in a position of authority, someone who had influence, felt different. It carried weight, not in a boastful way, but in a way that promised change. Some of the employees who had been watching cautiously began to realize the significance of the moment. They exchanged glances, their previous amusement or disbelief replaced by astonishment. The janitor, who had been invisible to them for so long, was now the center of attention in a way that no one could ignore. The CEO's presence elevated the situation, transforming curiosity into validation and skepticism into respect. The CEO gestured toward the piano. "Would you play something else?" he asked. "Something that shows your style, your heart." The janitor paused, considering the request. Playing in front of others had always been rare, and the idea of performing for someone like the CEO was intimidating. But the encouragement in the voice before him, calm and respectful, gave him courage. He nodded and positioned his hands over the keys once more. This time the music was more personal, more expressive. It told a story of perseverance and quiet strength, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. Each note carried emotion, echoing the hidden chapters of a life that had gone largely unnoticed. The CEO listened intently, his expression reflecting a mixture of admiration and contemplation. He could sense that this music was more than just sound. It was the essence of a person who had lived through challenges and kept his passion alive. The employees who had gathered were equally captivated. They watched in silence, realizing they had misjudged someone they had overlooked for years. The janitor's skill was undeniable, and the depth of feeling in his playing left a lasting impression. Some felt guilty for their earlier assumptions, while others felt inspired by the demonstration of hidden talent and resilience. As the performance continued, the CEO began to understand the magnitude of the discovery. This was not just a hidden talent. It was a story of human spirit, of perseverance in the face of invisibility. The janitor had lived a life of quiet dedication, and through music, he had found a voice that demanded acknowledgement. The realization filled the CEO with a sense of responsibility to ensure that such talent was recognized, nurtured, and respected. When the final chord rang out, the hallway was silent once again. The music had faded, but its impact lingered. The CEO approached the janitor, offering a warm, genuine smile. "You have a rare gift," he said. "It should not remain hidden. I want to help you share it in a way that honors your talent and your story." The janitor was overwhelmed by the gesture. For years, he had lived quietly, performing for empty rooms and unseen audiences. The idea that someone of influence not only recognized his skill but wanted to support him was almost unimaginable. He nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and cautious hope. The CEO then addressed the small group of employees who had been watching. "I hope this is a lesson for all of us," he said. "Never underestimate someone based on appearances or routine roles. Talent, dedication, and passion can exist in unexpected places." Today, we have witnessed something extraordinary. The employees listened, some nodding, some silent, absorbing the weight of the message. The janitor's performance had become more than music. It had become a lesson in humility, recognition, and the importance of looking beyond the surface. The janitor returned to his cleaning duties that night with a quiet sense of transformation. The building felt different, as if the acknowledgement he had received had subtly shifted the atmosphere. For the first time, he felt that his talent could no longer be ignored, and that the world might finally see him for who he truly was. That night marked a turning point. The janitor had stepped from the shadows, not through ambition or seeking attention, but through the undeniable power of his music. The CEO's recognition was more than just approval. It was validation of years of dedication, perseverance, and hidden brilliance. And while the future remained uncertain, the janitor felt a quiet assurance that he would never again be invisible to those willing to listen. To those willing to see beyond appearances after that night, life inside the building began to shift in ways that were small but meaningful. The janitor, once invisible to almost everyone, found that his presence was now acknowledged with warmth and respect. People who had once barely noticed him offered polite greetings, some even pausing to ask about his day or how he had learned to play the piano so beautifully. The recognition did not change who he was or how he lived, but it added a layer of dignity to his daily routine, a quiet affirmation that he had always been more than what people assumed. The CEO made good on his promise to support him, speaking with him privately about opportunities to share his talent in a controlled and meaningful way. There were no immediate grand gestures, no sudden fame, but there were invitations to perform at company events, to play for special gatherings, and even to mentor a small music group within the company. These chances were more than he had ever expected, but they were offered with thoughtfulness, allowing him to maintain his life, while gradually stepping into a larger world. The janitor approached these opportunities with a sense of humility. He did not seek attention or praise for its own sake, but he appreciated that his music could touch others. The act of performing now carried a new weight. It was no longer a secret kept for himself, but a gift shared with others who could benefit from it. Each performance became a bridge, connecting his private passion to a wider audience, enriching not just his life, but the lives of those who listened. Colleagues who had once dismissed him or underestimated his abilities began to treat him differently. They asked questions about his techniques, showed curiosity about the pieces he played, and expressed genuine admiration. The janitor found himself quietly guiding some of them through the basics of music, offering tips or demonstrating a simple melody. The act of teaching, even informally, gave him a sense of purpose beyond cleaning and maintaining the building. It was as if the music he had nurtured alone for so many years had finally found its audience. He continued his cleaning duties as before, moving through the hallways with the same careful attention and diligence. But now, the world seemed more attentive to him, and he felt a growing sense of belonging. The piano became not just a place for private expression, but a symbol of the intersection between dedication, passion, and recognition. The music carried stories, memories, and emotions that were no longer hidden entirely. They were shared in small, meaningful ways, creating ripples of impact across the building. Evenings remained his favorite time. When the corridors were quiet and the building seemed to breathe with him, he would sit at the piano, letting his fingers move naturally over the keys, exploring melodies both familiar and new. The music was still deeply personal, but now he was conscious of the subtle attention it attracted. Sometimes employees lingered just outside the door, listening quietly without interrupting. They did not need to comment or react. Their presence alone was an acknowledgement of his skill and dedication. Over time, few employees began to reflect on their own assumptions. They realized that they had allowed appearances, routines, and labels to shape their perceptions of the janitor for years. They saw how talent could be overlooked, how quiet dedication could remain invisible, and how their judgments had been incomplete. The experience became a lesson not only in humility, but also in paying attention to the unseen depths in the people around them. The janitor himself remained grounded. He did not let the recognition change his approach to life. He still arrived early, performed his duties with care, and maintained the routines that brought structure and stability to his day. But there was a subtle shift in his confidence, a quiet assurance that his talents mattered. He had been recognized not for superficial reasons, but for the depth of skill and the heart he poured into his music. He also found joy in seeing the reactions of others. The small moments an employee pausing in the hallway to nod in appreciation, a coworker asking about a song he played, a smile shared over the subtle grace of a melody, became part of the rhythm of his life. Each acknowledgement, however small, reinforced the idea that talent and dedication could not remain hidden forever. The world could eventually recognize what had always been there. His evenings at the piano continued to evolve. Sometimes he played quietly for himself, allowing the music to carry him through thoughts, memories, and emotions. Other times, he played with a more intentional awareness of the audience that might be listening. The balance between private expression and shared experience became a natural rhythm, a dance between the sanctuary of solitude, the joy of connection. The music also became a source of inspiration for the employees who had once doubted him. They began to see the value of pursuing passion, dedication, and skill, regardless of immediate recognition. The janitor storied his quiet perseverance, his hidden talent, and the eventual acknowledgement served as a subtle reminder that there were often depths to people that went unnoticed, waiting for the right moment to shine. Occasionally, the janitor reflected on his journey, the long years spent practicing alone, the sacrifices he had made, and the moments of doubt he had quietly endured. He realized that the recognition he received was not merely about talent. It was about persistence, resilience, and the courage to continue despite being unseen. The music had been his companion, his teacher, and his solace, and it had finally become a bridge between his hidden life and the world around him.